I didn't mean to look at her like that. I didn't mean to feel my pulse in my throat. I didn't mean to notice the way my hands trembled. But I did. The house had been too quiet for weeks. Not peaceful. Not calm. Quiet in the way an empty stage feels after the audience leaves. My daughter's room stayed exactly how she left it. Half-packed bookshelf, a sweater draped over the desk chair, a faint perfume that lingered like a ghost of noise. I told myself I was proud of her. I was. I am. But when I walked past her doorway at night, I felt something cave inward. For 20 years, I knew who I was at every hour. I was needed. I was called. I was summoned by small crises and school emails and forgotten permission slips. I was the keeper of everyone's rhythm. Now dinner ended and there was no second plate in the sink, no slammed bedroom door, no mom from down the hall. Just silence. My husband noticed it too, but differently. He filled it with television volume and long work calls. He kissed my forehead like always. He told me we had done a good job. I smiled. I nodded. I folded the laundry with mechanical precision. The truth is, I didn't know what to do with my hands when no one needed them. That scared me more than I expected. So I enrolled in the painting class. It felt harmless, productive, almost noble. For yourself, my husband had said, approving. You deserve something that's just yours. I didn't realize how dangerous that sentence was. The studio was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown. The stairwell smelled like turpentine and dust. The floors creaked. The lights hummed faintly overhead. There were 6 easels arranged in a loose arc, canvases already clipped in place. The first night, I stood in the doorway longer than necessary. I hadn't done anything new in years. I was used to being competent, used to being certain. Mariah was at the front, adjusting a lamp. She wore loose black linen pants and had paint on her forearm. Her hair was pulled back in a careless knot, like she hadn't thought too hard about it. She looked up when I stepped in. And she didn't look through me. She looked at me. Not the way other parents did at school events. Not the way my husband did when we discussed schedules. Not politely, not casually. She took me in. You must be Claire, she said. Just my name. No misses, no assumptions. Her voice was calm, steady. Younger than mine, but not fragile. It held something grounded. I nodded and introduced myself like I was interviewing for a job. She smiled slightly. You picked a good time to start. Tonight's about painting what you avoid. That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. The class began simply enough. Brushes, palettes, warm-up strokes. I focused on the instructions, on getting it right. I mixed colors carefully. I watched the others to make sure I wasn't behind. Mariah moved between us without hurry. When she came to my easel, I felt it before I saw her. The warmth of someone standing just inside your space. Not touching. Not quite. Too close. I swallowed. She studied my canvas. I had painted a muted landscape, soft hills, a horizon that didn't demand attention. Technically strong, she said. I felt a flicker of pride. But safe. The word landed heavier than it should have. I guess I like things balanced, I replied. She tilted her head slightly. Or controlled? My breath caught. Just a little. What was at risk here? Nothing. It was a class, a conversation, a harmless observation. Except I suddenly felt exposed in a way I hadn't agreed to. She reached past me to adjust my brush angle. Her fingers closed over mine for a fraction of a second. Guiding pressure, nothing more. But she didn't pull away immediately. Too close. Heat climbed the back of my neck. This color, she murmured. What if you let it bleed? Her hand moved away. I stared at the canvas. Let it bleed. I hadn't bled in years. I had been good, measured, appropriate, predictable. The boundary, I realized in that moment, wasn't about touch. It was about who I allowed myself to be. I went home that night unsettled. My husband asked how class went. Fine, I said automatically. He nodded, satisfied. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying a simple moment. Her hand over mine. The way she said safe like it was a question. The way she said my name without framing it in a role. Claire. Not mom. Not wife. Just Claire. The next week I told myself I wouldn't notice her as much. I failed immediately. She wore a white shirt rolled at the sleeves. There was a faint smudge of ultramarine near her wrist. She asked the group about fear, what colors it had, what shapes it hid in. I avoided answering. She didn't push. But when our eyes met across the room, something unspoken held. Too close. I started staying a few minutes after class, cleaning my brushes slowly. She would wipe down tables, stack canvases, move without noise. One night, she stopped beside me. Do you ever paint what you're afraid of? The question was simple. Too simple. My chest tightened. I don't know what I'd paint, I said. Her gaze didn't shift. You might. The risk was no longer theoretical. If I kept coming back, I might discover something I couldn't unknow. If I discovered it, I might not be able to pretend I hadn't. I had a husband who trusted me, a daughter who saw me as steady ground, a life that was intact. This wasn't about betrayal, it was about identity. And that felt more dangerous, because once you see yourself differently, you can't go back. That night, instead of painting hills, I painted a single figure turned slightly away from the viewer. Not detailed, not defined, just the suggestion of a woman standing at the edge of something. Mariah stood behind me quietly. You're getting closer, she said. To what? I didn't ask, but my pulse answered. There is a moment when you realize the life you built fits perfectly, and still doesn't fit you. I left the studio that evening with paint under my nails and something else lodged beneath my ribs. It wasn't desire yet. It was recognition. And that was enough to frighten me. Too close. The outside world didn't pause just because I started noticing the space between breaths. My daughter still sent short texts that made my heart lurch with relief. Made it to my 9 a.m. Miss you. Need money for books. As if motherhood could be reduced to a few glowing lines on a screen. My husband still kissed me goodbye in the kitchen, his hand settling on my waist out of habit. Not hunger. The dog still scratched at the back door at the same time every evening, impatient for his walk, impatient for a life that made sense. And I still moved through it all like I was fine. But now there was a second life threaded under the first one. It showed up on Tuesday nights. It smelled like turpentine and old brick. And it had a name. Mariah. The problem was, I didn't have a framework for what I was feeling. If it had been a man, I could have filed it away under something familiar. Midlife restlessness, boredom, vanity, whatever label made it easier to manage. But this wasn't that. This made me feel like my own skin had been quietly wrong for years, and I'd only just noticed the seam. I told myself to stop staying after class. I told myself to arrive late. I told myself to sit farther away. None of it worked, because it wasn't about distance. It was about how she looked at me like she wasn't waiting for me to perform. The next week, I walked into the studio 5 minutes early and froze. Mariah was alone, standing by the windows with her sketchbook open, charcoal smudged on her thumb. The overhead lights were still off, so the room was lit by the fading daylight, the kind that makes everything feel softer and more private than it has a right to be. She didn't hear me at first. I should have backed out, given her space. pretended I hadn't seen her like that. Quiet, unguarded, fully herself. But my feet didn't move. I watched her make a mark on the page, then pause, as if listening to something inside her. Then she looked up. Her eyes met mine, and something in me went still. Not calm, not comfortable. Still like a deer that's just realized it's being watched. She didn't startle. She didn't apologize for being alone. She simply nodded, like my presence belonged there. Early, she said. My throat tightened. I couldn't sit in the house. There. A truth I hadn't meant to say out loud. She studied me for a beat, then closed her sketchbook without rushing. The house is loud when it's quiet. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, and I hated it. I hated how quickly she found the thing I didn't want named. I forced a small laugh. That's accurate. She turned on the lamps one by one, warm pools of light blooming across the room. Do you want tea? There's a kettle. I should have said no. I should have kept it formal. But my body answered before my mouth did, and I heard myself say, sure. While she poured hot water into two mismatched mugs, I stood by my easel and stared at the blank canvas like it could tell me what I was supposed to do next. My pulse throbbed in my wrists. When she handed me the mug, our fingers brushed. Just a brush. Just skin. But my breath hitched like I'd been touched somewhere deeper. She noticed. Not with a smirk. Not with triumph. With awareness. And that, somehow, was worse. I took a quick sip and burned my tongue. The sting made me blink. Made me feel ridiculous. Mariah's mouth curved slightly. Careful. Clearly I'm graceful, I muttered. She leaned against the table, arms loosely crossed. You're not used to being unpracticed. The word landed in my chest. Unpracticed. I thought of my entire life, how competent I'd made myself, how useful, how safe. I thought of all the ways I'd learned to manage other people's needs so I wouldn't have to examine my own. I'm used to being responsible, I corrected. Mariah tilted her head. Those aren't the same thing. I looked away before she could see how much that hit. Students began arriving, voices filling the room, coats shaking off cold air. The spell broke, but the residue stayed on my skin. Class started. We worked on shadows and contrast, on letting darker tones exist without muddying the whole piece. Mariah circled the room, giving quiet feedback. Her attention moved like a spotlight, gentle but revealing. When she came to my canvas, I tried to focus on the paint. Tried to be normal. She stood at my shoulder, close enough that I could smell something faint on her. Soap, maybe. And the dry, clean scent of paper. My body reacted before my mind caught up. Warmth pooled low in my abdomen, sharp and confusing. I gripped the brush tighter. Mariah's voice dropped slightly. You're holding your breath again. I inhaled, startled that she'd noticed. That was the destabilizing shift, I realized. The way she saw the things I did without thinking. The way she noticed my body, not in a crude way, but in a way that made me feel like my body mattered. Like it had been speaking all along. I don't mean to, I said softly. I know, she replied. Her hand lifted, hovering near my wrist. I felt the anticipation like electricity. She didn't touch me. Instead, she pointed with the tip of her brush. Here, you can push darker. You're afraid it'll ruin it. My mouth went dry. What if it does? Mariah's gaze flicked to mine. Then you learn what you're willing to risk. The sentence wasn't flirtation, not overtly, but it slid under my ribs and lodged there. Risk. I thought of my husband's steady presence, my daughter's trust, the quiet predictability of our life. I thought of the word separation like it was a foreign language. I wanted to step back. I didn't. Mariah moved behind me to reach for a rag, and her sleeve grazed my shoulder. My skin prickled. Too close, my mind whispered, and my body responded like it agreed. I dipped my brush into darker paint and dragged it across the canvas. The line was bold, almost violent compared to the soft hills I'd painted before. My heart raced. Mariah watched. There. Her voice sounded satisfied, and I hated how much I wanted that satisfaction to be about me. After class, people filed out in pairs and clusters, chatting about weekends and dinner plans. The outside world kept moving, oblivious to the fact that my entire internal architecture was shifting. I stayed. Of course I stayed. I told myself I needed to clean up properly. I told myself it was polite. I told myself anything except the truth. I wanted to be in a room with her when no one else was watching. Mariah wiped down palettes at the sink. I rinsed my brushes too slowly. Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was loaded. She spoke without looking up. "You're thinking too hard." My laugh came out thin. That's sort of my specialty. Mariah turned the faucet off. She faced me, leaning back against the counter. "Why are you here, Claire?" The question was simple, but it wasn't about painting anymore. My breath caught. I stared at the water dripping from my brush. I could lie. I could say I'm bored. I could say my daughter left. I could say I need a hobby. But her eyes held steady, like she'd wait as long as it took for me to stop hiding behind neat answers. "I don't know," I admitted, and my voice cracked slightly. I can't stand the quiet." Mariah's expression softened. Not pity, not indulgence. Something more careful. "I'm not here to fill it," she said quietly. The words snapped something taut inside me. I felt defensive heat flare. "I didn't say you were." She held my gaze. "You didn't have to." My heartbeat thundered. I hated how exposed I felt. I hated how much I wanted to step closer, as if proximity could solve the ache. My fingers tightened around the brush handle until my knuckles went pale. Mariah's voice stayed calm, but her eyes were intense. "I'm asking because I need you to be honest, with yourself, not with me." I swallowed hard. The room felt smaller, the air warmer. I could feel my pulse everywhere, in my throat, in my fingertips, between my ribs. I wanted to say something that would make it stop. Instead, I whispered, "I'm afraid." Mariah's gaze flicked down to my mouth, then back to my eyes so fast I almost thought I imagined it. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. My lungs seized. I couldn't say you. I couldn't say this. I couldn't say what I've never allowed myself to want. So I said the closest truth I could reach. "I'm afraid that I'll wake up." Mariah didn't move, but her expression changed, almost imperceptibly, like she'd heard something she didn't want to mishandle. "Then don't do it here," she said softly. "Don't do it because you're empty." My stomach flipped, sharp with humiliation and longing. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Because the worst part wasn't that she'd named it. The worst part was that she was right. And now she was looking at me like she wouldn't let me use her as a life raft. Mariah pushed off the counter, grabbed her bag, and paused at the door. She didn't look back right away. When she did, her voice was quiet and steady. "Come next week," she said, "but come for the paint." Then she left, and I stood alone in the studio with my hands damp, my chest tight, and the kind of fear that doesn't feel like panic. It feels like a door you can't unsee. The week after she said it, I tried to prove her wrong. I told myself I wasn't empty. I was just adjusting, recalibrating. like a house settling after a storm. But the truth followed me into my own kitchen. It followed me into the grocery store aisle where I stood too long in front of cereal boxes, forgetting what my husband liked because suddenly I couldn't remember what I liked. It followed me into bed, where I lay facing the dark and listened to his breathing deepen beside me, steady and familiar, while my mind replayed Mariah's voice like a line of music I couldn't stop humming. Don't choose me because you're empty. Choose me because you're sure. I should have been offended. Instead, I felt seen, in a way that made my skin prickle with shame. I skipped class that Tuesday. I told myself it was discipline. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself it was respect. For her, for my marriage, for my own sanity. But when 8 o'clock hit, my body reacted like I'd missed something vital, like I'd forgotten to breathe on purpose and was finally remembering. My hands wouldn't settle. I moved around the house, touching objects just to feel something, stacking dishes, wiping counters already clean, folding a throw blanket that didn't need folding. My husband glanced up from the couch. You okay? Just restless, I said. He patted the cushion next to him. Sit with me. I sat. His arm came around my shoulders. Warm, familiar, correct. And my chest tightened anyway. Not because I didn't love him. I did. He'd been my life partner for decades. He'd held me through sickness, through grief, through the long stretch of raising a child. He was decent. He was safe. But sitting there, tucked under his arm, I felt like I was wearing a coat that fit perfectly and still didn't feel like mine. That night, I went upstairs early and cried in the shower where the water could hide the sound. The next morning, my daughter called while I was loading the dishwasher. Her face filled my phone screen, hair messy, eyes bright with the kind of life that comes from living away from home for the first time. Mom, she said laughing, you wouldn't believe what happened. I got lost trying to find my sociology building. Of course you did. I smiled automatically. Did you make it? Barely. And I'm starving. I think I'm going to eat ramen for the rest of my life. I laughed with her, warmed by the familiarity. Then she paused, studying me. You look different, she said. My throat tightened. Different how? Like, I don't know. She shrugged. Like you're thinking a lot. I swallowed. I'm fine. She didn't push. She never did. Not with me. I was the steady one, the one she leaned on, not the one who wobbled. Okay, she said softly. I miss you. I miss you too, I replied, and meant it so much it hurt. When the call ended, the kitchen felt too quiet again, and that was when I realized I wasn't just missing my daughter. I was missing a version of myself who had never had to ask, who am I when no one needs me? The following Tuesday, I went back to the studio. I told myself I was going for the paint. I told myself I needed the routine. I told myself I wasn't going for her. My body betrayed me the moment I climbed the stairs. My pulse quickened, breath shallow, palms damp like I was about to step onto a stage. I opened the studio door. Mariah was already there, standing by the windows again. She looked up at me, and I felt the shift instantly, like the air had a new pressure. She didn't smile. She didn't frown either. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a kind of careful distance that made my stomach drop. Hi, I said, too softly. Hi, she answered. Just that. No warmth, no edge, and it hurt more than it should have. Class began. She taught. I painted. The room was full of ordinary sounds, brushes tapping water cups, someone laughing about their terrible perspective, the heater clicking on and off. But my awareness narrowed until it felt like it was only the two of us inside a glass box. Mariah didn't come to my easel right away. She moved around the other students, leaned in, offered quiet encouragement, adjusted a lamp. Every time she passed behind me, my skin flared with anticipation. And every time she didn't stop, something in me tightened. That was the first internal fracture becoming undeniable. I wanted her attention. Not like a student, like a woman. I tried to swallow it down. I tried to focus on my canvas. An unfinished portrait, just loose shapes. But this time the figure was turning toward the viewer, not away. My brush trembled. Too close, my mind whispered. But the phrase didn't sound like a warning anymore. It sounded like hunger. Finally, Mariah stopped behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't breathe. I felt her gaze on the canvas, then on me. "You came," she said quietly. The words should have been neutral. They weren't. There was something under them. Relief, maybe, or a guarded kind of acknowledgement. I swallowed. "I told you I would." "I told you to come for the paint," she replied. My heart thudded hard. "I am." Silence. She leaned slightly closer, and my breath caught before I could stop it. She noticed. Her voice stayed soft. "Do you want me to help?" The sensible answer was no. The correct answer was no. My mouth said, "Yes." My body reacted before I could explain it. Heat flooding my chest, pulse hammering, a sudden lightheadedness like I'd stood up too fast. Mariah's hand hovered near my wrist again. I held still, afraid that if I moved even an inch, I'd fall into something I couldn't climb out of. Her fingers closed around my hand, guiding the brush. 1 second. 2. Her touch was light, professional, controlled. But her thumb pressed once, almost imperceptibly, against the inside of my wrist. A pulse point. A place you don't touch unless you know exactly what you're doing. My entire body went taut. I inhaled sharply. Mariah's hand paused. The brush stopped. Her gaze flicked to my face, and I felt her attention like a hand on my throat. This was the moment. I knew it. My skin knew it. If someone walked in right now, another student returning for a forgotten coat, the building manager, anyone, there would be questions. There would be looks. There would be a story told in whispers. Claire, 44, married, mother. Claire, acting like a teenager. Claire, ruining everything. Mariah's hand loosened. She started to pull away. And something in me panicked. My fingers curled around hers before I could stop myself. Not grabbing, not holding captive, just refusing the distance. Her breath hitched. That tiny sound cracked something wide open inside me. I turned my head slowly, and our faces were suddenly close enough that I could see the fine freckles across her nose. Too close. My stomach twisted with fear and want. Mariah didn't move. She didn't step back. She didn't step forward either. Her eyes dropped to my mouth, then lifted again. The room around us blurred. I could still hear the heater, the faint scrape of another student's easel. The world continued moving, and I was standing on the edge of a decision. My internal moral question rose up, private and sharp, a blade I held against my own throat. Was I about to blow up my entire life just to feel awake? I didn't answer it. I couldn't. My mouth opened, but what came out wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even an apology. "I tried not to come," I whispered. Mariah's expression tightened with something like pain. "Claire." Hearing my name in her voice, low, careful, made my eyes sting. "I'm not asking you to fix me," I said quickly, desperate. "I'm not, I just—" My breath shook. I didn't know it could feel like this. Like someone sees me. Mariah's jaw flexed. Her fingers trembled under mine. "You're married," she said. And there it was. The risk. Spoken aloud. Heavy and real. "You have a daughter." "I know," I whispered, and the words tasted like guilt. "I know." Mariah's eyes held mine. "You've never been with a woman." It wasn't a question. The shame hit hot and immediate, and my body reacted. Face flushing, chest tightening, breath catching like I'd been caught doing something wrong. I managed a tiny nod. Mariah exhaled, slow and controlled, like she was steadying herself. "Then you can't do this because you're lonely." "I'm not," I started, then stopped because the truth was worse. I was lonely. Not for people. For myself. Mariah's gaze softened, but her body shifted back an inch. Enough distance to hurt. "Don't choose me because you're empty," she said again, quieter this time. "Choose me because you're sure." Her words split something inside me, clean and brutal. Because in that moment I realized I didn't know how to be sure. I only knew how to be needed. I released her hand like it burned. The loss of contact felt like a physical ache, immediate and sharp. Mariah stepped back fully, putting air between us. Her voice stayed gentle, but the distance in it was unmistakable. "Finish your painting." I stared at my canvas, at the half-formed face of the woman turning toward the viewer. I picked up my brush with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to paint. I tried to breathe. But the room had changed. I had changed. Because now it wasn't just recognition. It was confession. And I could feel it tightening around my ribs like a vow I hadn't meant to make. When class ended, I left without staying. I didn't look back. I walked down the stairs too fast, my legs unsteady, my lungs struggling. Outside, the night air hit my face, cold and real. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the streetlights and the passing cars and the ordinary world that had no idea what had almost happened upstairs. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A text from my husband. "Want me to save you dinner?" My throat closed. I typed back, "Yes." Then I deleted it. Then I typed it again. Then I stared at the blinking cursor like it was the edge of a cliff, because I could still feel Mariah's thumb on my pulse. And I could still hear the question I hadn't answered. I sent the yes and immediately hated myself for it. Not because saving dinner was wrong, not because my husband didn't deserve a simple answer, but because my hands were still shaking from someone else's touch. Someone else's almost touch. And I was pretending I lived in a world where that didn't matter. I walked into the house like I was returning from any ordinary Tuesday night. The hallway light was on. The dog lifted his head and thumped his tail once, lazy and trusting. The television murmured in the living room, a laugh track spilling into the air like a blanket someone had thrown over silence. My husband didn't look up right away. "Hey," he called, casual. "How was class?" I opened my mouth and nothing came. Because the honest answer wasn't fine. It was, I almost ruined everything for the pressure of a thumb on my pulse. It was, I looked at another woman and felt my life crack. So I did what I'd always done. I performed. "Good," I said. "We worked on portraits." He nodded, still watching the screen. "Sounds nice." Nice. That word made me want to scream. I ate the dinner he saved with a stomach that felt too tight. I asked him about his day. I laughed at the right moments. I cleared the plates. I rinsed them. I did everything correctly. But my body kept betraying me. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt as if it were her. It wasn't. It was my daughter sending a blurry photo of her dorm room mess with a joking caption. It was a group chat from other moms. It was a calendar reminder. It was never Mariah. By midnight, I was lying in bed next to my husband, staring into the dark, and I finally admitted the thing I'd been circling for weeks. I wasn't just attracted. I was afraid. Afraid of how quickly I'd become a woman I didn't recognize. Afraid of how much I wanted to be recognized again. The next morning, I moved through my routine like a ghost. Coffee, laundry, emails, the dog walk, the grocery list. The same life I'd built brick by brick. And under it, that unanswered question throbbed like a bruise. Was I about to blow up my entire life just to feel awake? I didn't answer it. I couldn't. Because the second I tried, another thought pushed through like a blade. What if I already blew it up the moment I realized I wanted more? I texted Mariah by noon. My fingers hovered over the screen for a long time before I typed anything, like I was waiting for my own permission. I'm sorry. I deleted it. Too small, too vague, too easy to misunderstand. I didn't mean to. Deleted. I can't stop thinking about last night. Deleted. Finally, I sent the only truth I could stand to look at. I didn't come for the paint. And that scares me. I stared at the message after it left, breath shallow, pulse racing, like I'd just stepped out onto a ledge. No reply. An hour passed. 2. The outside world kept moving. Neighbors mowing lawns, delivery trucks backing up with beeping warnings, my husband's voice on the phone in his office. And I was stuck in that waiting space where shame and longing start to blur. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed. Mariah, can you come by the studio tomorrow before class? No emoji, no softness, just an invitation that felt like a test. I typed back yes before I could overthink it. That night, I barely slept. I replayed every second of our almost kiss until it stopped feeling like memory and started feeling like hunger. I could still feel the exact place her thumb had pressed, as if my skin had been marked. Too close. The next day, I went downtown early, telling my husband I needed extra time for errands. He didn't question it. He trusted me. That trust sat heavy in my chest as I climbed the studio stairs. The building was quiet at that hour. The hallway smelled sharper in daylight, more chemical, less romantic. I reached the studio door and paused with my hand on the knob. For a moment, I pictured turning around, going home, cooking dinner, texting my daughter, living the life that made sense. But my body moved anyway. Inside, the studio was lit by the pale winter sun. Mariah stood near the sink rinsing brushes. She looked up as I entered, and the space between us filled instantly with everything we hadn't said. She wiped her hands on a rag and approached slowly. No smile, no hostility. Just that calm, measured presence that made me feel like she could see straight through the layers of my life. You texted me, she said. I nodded, throat tight. I didn't know if I should. You shouldn't have, she replied quietly. The words hit hard, immediate. My stomach dropped. Okay. Mariah's gaze held mine. Not because I didn't want to hear it. My breath caught. Because it's not fair to either of us if you're reaching for me like a lifeline, she continued. Claire, you're standing in a doorway, and you want me to pull you through it. Heat flared behind my eyes. I swallowed it down. I'm not asking you to pull me, I whispered, even though part of me was. I'm asking you not to disappear. Mariah's expression softened for a heartbeat. Then it tightened again, like she was forcing herself to stay careful. I can't be the reason you implode, she said. I won't. The firmness in her voice triggered something raw in me, an old instinct to shrink back, to apologize, to become agreeable. Instead, I surprised myself. I'm already imploding, I said. The confession was quiet, but it felt like something breaking. Mariah stilled. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. My hands trembling, my breath coming faster, a hot rush in my chest that felt like panic and desire tangled together. I go home and everything is fine, I continued, voice shaking. And I sit there, and I feel like I'm watching my life from across the room, like I've been playing a part so long I forgot it was a part. Mariah's eyes flicked down, then back up, the smallest sign that my words were landing. And when you look at me, I said, I feel awake. I feel like a person, not a function. Silence. I could hear the distant hum of traffic through the windows. Mariah's voice came softer. That's exactly why I'm scared. I laughed once, breathless, almost bitter. You're scared? Yes, she said, because I want you. And wanting you doesn't erase the fact that you're married. It doesn't erase your life. The words hit my body like heat. Want. My mouth went dry. I felt the pull forward like gravity. Too close. Mariah must have seen it because she took a careful step back, like she was keeping the boundary visible between us. Don't come to me because you're empty, she said again, but this time it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a plea. I inhaled shakily. What if I'm not empty? Mariah's gaze sharpened. Then prove it. The pressure in my chest rose, tight and unbearable. How? I whispered. Mariah's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with something restrained. By going home and telling the truth to yourself. By not making me your first brave act. That sentence landed like a verdict, and I hated it. Because she was right. Because the part of me that wanted to dissolve into her wanted it now. Wanted relief. Wanted touch. Wanted an answer. But she wouldn't give me that kind of escape. I took a step forward anyway, unable to help it. Mariah didn't move. She didn't reach for me. But her breath changed. Just slightly. And I felt it like permission and refusal at the same time. I don't know how to do this, I said, voice barely there. Mariah's eyes held mine. Neither do I, she admitted, but I know what I won't do. The air between us tightened, a fragile equilibrium, trembling. I stood there with my hands at my sides, shaking with everything I wasn't allowed to ask for. And she stood across from me, wanting me and refusing me in the same breath. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, something in me tightened like a knot being pulled. I didn't go back to the studio that night. I went home. And for the first time in years, I didn't move through my house like I belonged to it. I walked in and stood in the entryway, coat still on, keys still in my hand, and I looked at the framed photos on the wall. Vacations, birthdays, first day of school smiles. I saw a woman in every picture who looked steady. I saw a woman who looked certain. I didn't see the woman standing there now, pulse racing, skin alive, terrified of her own clarity. My husband came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Hey, you're early. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The lines around his eyes, the familiar slope of his shoulders, the man who had shared my bed, my bank account, my grief, my joy. He deserved honesty, and that realization hurt more than anything else. I need to talk to you, I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. We sat at the dining table like we were discussing logistics. For a moment, I almost defaulted, almost said something vague about space, about midlife, about needing time. But Mariah's words echoed through me like a quiet command. Don't make me your first brave act. So I didn't. I don't know who I am anymore, I said slowly. And I think I haven't known for a long time. He frowned, confused, concerned. Claire, I love you, I continued, and I meant it. But I've been asleep. I've been playing a role so well that I forgot there was anything else. The silence that followed wasn't explosive. It was heavy. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He asked one question. Is there someone else? My breath caught. There it was. The risk. The social collapse. The story people would whisper if they knew. I could lie. I didn't. There's someone who made me realize I'm not done, I said carefully. I haven't crossed a line physically, but I crossed something. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff and landing on my feet. Pain flickered across his face. Real, human pain. And it carved through me. We talked for hours. About years. About comfort and duty and love that had shifted shape without either of us noticing. There was grief. There were tears. But there wasn't hatred. Because the truth wasn't that I wanted to destroy my life. It was that I wanted to live it consciously. When I finally went upstairs, I stood in front of the mirror and stared at myself. My face was flushed from crying. My eyes looked different. Not wild, not reckless. Awake. I whispered it again, softly, to the empty room. I don't think I was ever lonely. I was just asleep. And this time, it didn't feel like a confession. It felt like a key turning. The separation wasn't dramatic. There was no slammed door. Just quiet. Adult decisions made over paperwork and conversations, and shared understanding that something fundamental had shifted. When I slid my wedding ring off for the first time in 22 years, my hand felt lighter and unbearably exposed at the same time. I stared at the pale band of skin where it had rested. Too close, I thought. But it didn't sound like fear anymore. It sounded like readiness. The night I went back to the studio, I didn't text first. I didn't ask permission. I climbed the stairs with steady steps. Mariah was setting up canvases when I entered. She looked up, and whatever she saw in my face made her still completely. I closed the door behind me. No students yet. Just us. I told him, I said. Her breath left her slowly. Claire, she whispered. I'm not empty, I continued. And I'm not choosing you to escape something. I'm choosing to stop escaping myself. The words hung between us, trembling. Mariah stepped closer, cautious, searching my face like she was looking for cracks. You're sure? She asked quietly. The question was gentle, but it held weight. I felt it in my bones, in my spine, in the place that had been numb for years. Yes, I said. And this time it wasn't desperation. It was clarity. The shift happened without drama. She moved first. Slowly. Her hand lifted, giving me every chance to step back. I didn't. Her fingers brushed my jaw. Heat bloomed under my skin. Familiar now, but no longer frightening. Too close. But I didn't want distance anymore. I leaned in. Our mouths met softly at first, almost tentative, like we were both confirming something we'd already known. The world didn't explode. There was no cinematic rush of music. There was breath, warmth, a slow loss of gravity. Her lips were gentle, searching, and when I responded, something inside me unlocked with a quiet, almost devastating relief. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't reckless. It felt like coming home to a room I hadn't realized was mine. Her hand slid into my hair, not claiming, just anchoring. Mine rested against her waist, steady. When the kiss deepened, it wasn't urgent. It was intentional. A choice made in full awareness of consequence. The outside world still existed. My daughter, my husband, the life I was rearranging. But I wasn't running from it. I was stepping into something new with open eyes. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads rested together. Mariah exhaled a shaky laugh. You're different. I know, I whispered. I won't be your escape, she said softly. You're not, I replied. You're my mirror. She studied me for a long moment. Then she kissed me again, slower this time, as if sealing something sacred. We didn't rush further. We didn't collapse into hunger. We stayed there, touching, breathing, letting the reality settle into our bones. The intimacy wasn't about possession. It was about presence. Later, when the first student knocked on the door downstairs, we stepped apart naturally. No panic, no scrambling, just a shared glance that carried everything. That night, I walked home under streetlights that seemed brighter than before. The air felt sharper in my lungs. My life wasn't simpler. It was more complicated than ever. But it was mine. For years, I thought safety meant staying small. Now I understood something else. Safety had been a cage I built with good intentions. And stepping out of it didn't feel like falling. It felt like finally standing upright. If I could choose again, knowing the cost, would I still dare to wake up? Some stories whisper instead of shouting. They linger because what mattered was never said. If this confession felt close to something you've lived, or something you've almost lived, stay a little longer. Share your thoughts below. And if you want more stories that explore the quiet moments that change everything, you're always welcome here.